Sounded pretty cool for being roasted crickets, don't they? That's right, I bet down in the South you're probably feeling like steamed crickets. But crickets, nonetheless. Really sad state of affairs. We can't be crickets. We have to step up, got to do something. Otherwise it gets, what if we don't stop, runs us over. And I'll say this over and over and over again. I haven't found any other example or rule or situation or historical fact that states otherwise. And so it's, again, I get, every once in a while, a lot less, I think, over time, I get blamed for not being aware of certain things myself, and I just can't fight the beast kind of thing. And I'm saying, well, that's all we have to fight, because there's the beast. When the beast stops, we can stop. We can live in that peace we were promised. Again, that's why, focusing on land disposal, soil disposal, I said the wrong word, see? It's easy to get into the street language. And not that it has to be so perfect all the time, but for you on the broadcast here, I want you to hear that there is these distinctions, and as soon as I catch it for myself, I try to call it out. That land is defined in statute, it's not soil. It has a whole different concept. But soil disposal, it shows us these peace and settlement. Are you living peacefully in settlement? In settled peace, I should say? Is that what's being protected? Remember, it wasn't serving the community. It wasn't serving the protect and serve was not to the community. It was to the property, actually. We can go deeper in all that, but I just don't have the time here. We can go lots of discussion. We can get off on our own opinions. I've been listening here over these quite a few weeks. It takes a long time to come to some ideas on how to respond, to try and find a neutral place to respond. Just trying to get people shake us out of our I don't even know what it is. I lose, like I said, I'm getting to the point I'm really losing my intelligence. I just have no words in some of this anymore, because it's just so much discussion to get to what we discuss, and then to get to what we discuss is really just a shade, a graduation of things. And it's really never addressing the real point, which is beating us up. Now, we're not living in a peaceful settlement. And that the whole root of the problem is not us and our opinions of what that is. It's that we have to turn our attention to it and stop it. Stop what's interfering with our peaceful settlement. Now, until we get to that, I don't know how we get to the ones that are actually actively there's in between criminality. There's the overpressor criminality that's pretending to be, well, they are authority, but they're pretending to be authority. And then you got the sub criminal class, which is just people being dumb, just don't have it in them to care for anybody else. And then you got even a subber class that says, well, these are the people that are downtrodden by the society that's created, and they have to do things that otherwise would be looking criminal, like take the pie out of that's cooling in your windowsill. They got to take that because they got to go eat, because somebody else somewhere made a decision that they no longer can go to work. And so we have all these gradations of things, and our opinions are coming through that. And our opinions come, and if we have continued to have an opinion, I would suggest to you that we're not actively doing anything, hence why the crickets are so stubborn. We got roasted crickets. August came, and now it's the fall, folks. We're probably going to see it. We just went through our 110. I heard it was 112, 113, just local to us, and those of you that are up in that range in the south are probably steamed crickets. There's the rest of us are maybe roasted that are crickets, and then so now it's going to be, now the temperature drops. That's what we get, and now it's the fall. So we had our 4 seasons. We're going back into the beginning one for us. So you now have to recuperate as crickets or stop being crickets. So let's move on to another little character here we can play in the analogies of characters and what they do. The grasshopper. That has a whole different interesting connotation. We're going to go into being maybe a little bit of the grasshopper here as we learn our lessons. And somewhere back in the past here recently, I think it was Flash on, I think it was a moment that I could hear the broadcast dork table on the weekend. And I turn these broadcasts on, but then I turn them on to listen, then I can't. I got to go make a call, talk with someone, go write something, and so I don't get to hear a lot of the stuff that goes on other times in broadcasts. I attempt to, but it's not really good. And As I say that, I miss Grammy Mary's broadcast a lot. I just don't, that's just the bad time for me to be sitting down and listening to anything. And I have been remiss many times. I didn't know, but just to shout out again to Grammy Mary and her donations to keep the Spreaker line up. She's still doing that. So on top of her doing her broadcast and on top of the energy she puts in integration and help, and she's also doing what she can in donating to keep the voice in archive, to keep going. And so I thank her right now, because I forgot the last few weeks that I had been told that that's what was going on. In the change-up of things, I'm not privy to all those things going on. And so things change fast around me, it seems. I'm looking around and things are happening and things remain the same and things change. But moving over to this idea, we go from crickets, maybe we move into the thought where we're still working it out. We're actually integrating with trying to do something, and we're learning our lessons as we try to do here behind the woodshed. We learn our lessons, the principles we should have learned that they're using against us when we didn't. But we moved to the grasshopper and ideas come out. I think Flash made a question. He said, how do you collapse an illusion? And I had a different answer then, but over time you start thinking about it. It occurred to me, though, what flashed here to me recently, just a little bit ago. Why are you even interested? If it's an illusion, how is it being inflated to not be collapsed? How is it still have structure if you know it's an illusion? I think the question answers itself. You don't collapse an illusion. It's an illusion. It's not really there. It's just your perception. It's anyone's perception, and this becomes another problem. Anyone's perception is up to them to decide. But I wouldn't, and this is what, I guess to me, it spoke to me in a way. Over time, I've developed this thing that we are dealing in this illusion. It's a different style of illusion. If something is an illusion, it doesn't exist. That's perception. Just change the perception. It evaporates right there because there's nothing foundational. But there are illusions that are used as cover, shields. Like I said, the spaghetti western, it's the false front that are used by those that know to present them for your consumption that needs to be collapsed. Well, that's a perception as well. The problem is it's persistent, and it's actually generated by someone who wants to do you harm that you have to destroy. How do you collapse that illusion? You call it out. Well, in both cases, you're having to do something. You're just not being, you're doing. You're either changing your perception because it's just an illusion. It was an illusion all the time. There's nothing to collapse. Let's put it that way. And then you have the one that's being generated that needs to be collapsed because it's a crime against you, or fraud. It's a fraud against you. And there's other ways. But so how do you collapse an illusion? Stop believing that it's real. Stop giving it energy, and if it is an illusion that's used against you or others, call it out. And that's the why I'm talking about that, not to be like Yoda here, but to say that's what, in a way, how do you collapse illusion is exactly what I've been telling you about behind the woodshed about your governmental system. There's a framework that is inhabited by people. When I say going after government, I'm talking about going after individual people. This is not anomalous. This is not some big amorphic thing I can't understand. I'm in some big monolith. No, these are individual people that are doing certain things. They have certain standards, and you just start having to apply the standards, and all of a sudden their illusion of power and authority is shed because it never existed. And the thought came to mind, I tell you, Matrix is not a movie. How do you bend the spoon? The spoon doesn't exist. That's how you bend the spoon. And so to make the question, how do you collapse an illusion, is kind of focusing on is actually giving substance to something that you've already agreed doesn't exist. And that's what I tell you the government system is. The one that they keep foisting on us. That's the illusion that's generated that we can destroy by calling it out. Because once you see through it, it's not transparent to you what's going on. And you can call it out in a way that communicates that doesn't insult people from their perspective. Remember, they're the receiver. You have to speak to that through that filter. It's not something, it's just a limitation. That you just call the illusion out, and it works. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still trying to figure out how to speak to you all, to break down any one of your perceptions and misperceptions, even of what I say, to try and get you to see the better thing to do against the problem. It's not really me telling you here, do this. I would ask you to do certain things, but I mean, it's not up for me to ultimately make that decision. You will have to decide what is important to you and what's real to you. And if that happens to be an illusion, I'm telling you, you better get that fixed before you go in and start tilting at windmills, as they might say. And so the very important question, I really kind of fixed in on that, but I didn't have a chance to even type down what I had a different, like I said, I had a wholly different response. It was more an application response to Flash, but it's occurred to me since then. It stuck with me that question has to be answered by you, in the answer being, well, it's an illusion. Why did I even have that question? The only question is I'm being evasive of my own responsibility to call that out and learn how to call it out, that people see it and don't get offended. And yes, you have to deal with that. For as much as we would say that, well, you can't make feelings a law, they are feelings that you have to be gentle with. I mean, it may be a wrong feeling that someone has, but you still have to speak through that. They can still get insulted because their so-called skin is so thin. But that's the problem of communicating. Why I can't talk to some people, and some other people can talk to the people I can't talk to, and finally get them to actually hear what's going on and actually start to engage it. They break down the why, they don't have the why. And so, without getting too much on, again, I'm off my tabs, but it just came up and I kept forgetting to talk about this. You can't collapse an illusion more than to realize it's the illusion, nothing to collapse. The spoon, you want to bend the spoon's not there. Now, they sound all esoteric and weirded out, but when you get into practice in the law, I told you that the government system is the illusion. It's there generated that you have to visit, you have to see, and then call it out. Now, there's certain formalities, and I know that's even a problem. I understand these things. We still have to do sometimes what is maybe not what we ought to be doing. It's like when I talk about grantees even having to respond at all to anybody coming to them to say they have something more to do than what they've been granted to do. That is a felony if it comes underneath a color of authority. It's that fast. Hardly anybody understands really the deepness and the absoluteness of that. It speaks to maintaining peace and settlement. Because being cast at the winds, well, how functional are you in a place that demands that we keep the place that we live in? Remember, you can't even let the forests go wild. They will wild and they will burn, like we see right now. So there's a tending to of our environment as well. And this is as an aside, I'm being now charged with being an environmentalist and a fish lover because I'm saving a bunch of mosquito fish in the pond. Now, these are my friends, and we're all joking, but this is how quickly it goes. If you care about something, you just jump in, no matter what. You try and do what you can to stop a problem. In this case, I've got a pond that it wasn't graded quite right, and so it trapped a bunch of little mosquito fish. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't like mosquitoes. I don't want to be bit by the dang things, and I think they serve a real good purpose. Why would I watch thousands and thousands die? And so I went to task. I've been cutting a trench all week, right before August hit, the heat wave. I was afraid about that because that pond is drying up on one end, right? So now all my friends are telling me I'm some eco-terrorist fish lover. But see, that's amongst friends, and everybody understands this. This is the calling out of that illusion. That anyone can just be blanket, someone that doesn't involve themselves with their environment just because of the thing they think or they do is another trap, another division, another distraction, another red herring in the fish discussion here, and it gets us nowhere amongst ourselves. It certainly is the buffer that keeps us from actually going and doing something worthwhile, not value-based, but worthwhile. So, I saved them. I got them moved on. I've still now got to grade the ditch so that it'll do that next year. But the point is that you throw in your environment where you can to keep it functioning, because this is a man-made world. Not to slight all you women in this politically correct insult. See, we all play our part. We all have a place, and it all depends on what we choose in our decisions to go do. And I'm suggesting to you that all those choices that you ought to think you could have done are being interfered with wrongly and feloniously at an official level, where what you tend and want to do is not a crime, I mean in a general sense. It doesn't give you carte blanche right to go invade someone's land, to go tell them what they need to do with their land. No, it's on your land, or where you walk, or where you go. And so there's this limit. That's your freedom. That's what I would call that more natural freedom, not the imposed freedom of liberty, in the sense of like you're a sailor on an admiralty on a ship, and you get to go somewhere now because you have your credential to go. See, these words are pretty broad spectrum. As I was talking to a gentleman here at the miners district meeting, knowledgeable guy and stuff, really out there. He does seminars and things, and we were talking, and I said, I take a particular view on this, and it's really kind of narrow about how this really works out. That if you take your language, and I explained to him what I've told you all here about, you take your definitions. And this is in a general sense. It may not necessarily be in a specific sense, but you take your definitions. If a word has more than one definition, think of them in jurisdictionally, that they each fit in a different place of actual function. In other words, they can all exist as a different meaning, but you only apply those in a particular place. That place is what I call jurisdiction. And when you start to do that with language, all these words take on not a contest, and they don't take on the frivolousness that they sound, and they don't take on the excuse that a lot of people put on them to make issues. They have a place, and you have to make sure that you use them there. That when you do it that way, a lot of this stuff settles out, and then all of a sudden you can start working more directly. And the words aren't the question that they're maintained by lots of people. In other words, if you go to a place and the authorship of that place says that the word black is white and white is black, if you don't treat it that way, in that place, you're going to always be on the wrong part of it. And then then we whine, well, why is white black and black? Well, maybe you're not supposed to be there, and you were supposed to tell them that. And so that the fact that you wandered into that's one problem. But when they come and impose upon you, now that's a whole different one, and that's what I speak to. How do you throw off this imposition? As someone was saying, and I thank you very much for it humbles me to hear some of this stuff. Thank you for the acknowledgement of what I do or attempt to do. But as I responded, I'm not a legal expert, certainly. What I really try to do, is I just come with my experience to tell you, hey, there's something out there. It's not good for us in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, and there's a way to communicate it. So I don't come as a legal expert necessarily. I come to try and tell you there's a better way to go after the problems that affect us. So it's just that way. I don't really think about it really more, and it's really an imperative that I do, I guess I have an internal slight for myself that it's such an imperative that people disregard. It's troubling a bit to watch. It's really watch the societies just collapse, and they have all the power to do something. We hear the abuse, the crime against people, and we don't respond. And a lot of times, what do we do? I mean, it's so large, and why I've had to take, this is a concession as well. When I tell you go local, it's because I don't know how to go international. I just know that the source of the harm is there, that we can address that at that level, but we're going to address it locally. I mean, I can't go over to the UN and choke off the guy who just admitted that he killed thousands and thousands of people in Haiti. 6 years and thousands of deaths later, UN admits it imported cholera to Haiti. Folks, this is where I tell you I stop finding how intelligent I am. I have no words here other than just to tell you this. I can't describe how I even sense about this whole thing, that I find out what we already knew, actually. The confirmation that this UN organization is a criminal beyond, evil beyond. 6 years and thousands of deaths later, if we didn't get that the Bush-Clinton cabal working in billions of dollars that was supposed to help Haiti, that didn't give us a clue many years ago. When you see the writing of this story, just think about this, folks. 6 years later, that the UN admits. That's why I say you try to get their admission and their confession. If they won't, you write it on paper for them. And if they don't answer it, you've got the evidence that they admit and confess. You don't take the excuse, well, I called them, but they didn't really respond. No, you make the response. You create what you need out of the facts that you've developed in truth. You don't make it up, I guess is what I'm saying here. But 6, think about this, folks. Can really think about this. Has really stunned me to just, you know what's going on, but you don't have the proof. And then when you just see the confirmation of it, it's just, this is an evil in the world that we by our lack of response to it, by our excuses, by anybody that supports it, it makes a crime out of each and every one of us at some level. And I'm helpless to the point just to tell you about it. I'm without words to describe how heinous this is. But we're doing our part. I get some solace because in 2013 we sued the plan that this entity in the world, this creation by the Zio West is. But before that, and cognized before that, and all that we talk about here, we in 2013 sued the tools, the methods that this agency did to expose. It's a treason against us. This is beyond my opinion anymore. If I ever had a question, it was all ended when they all agreed that the people, the tools, the soldiers that implement the plans from the UN are treasonous. We now see that they're beyond treason. They're beyond crime. This is evil beyond. 6 years and thousands of deaths later, the UN admits it imported cholera to Haiti. Can't mean these people mean anyone any good. And look at the policies that the people adopt and keep going with that allow this organization to continue to exist, to be the tool of destruction in everybody's life. And the people that would allow this to be that tool, they're your neighbors at some level. They're your county commissioners. They're your city councilmen or women. They're the planners, the movers, the shakers, the consensus builders. They're the solution makers. All that our lawsuit shows is a felony in the minimum, a treason going forward further, and absolute war crimes as we see implemented out. To me, I don't care what you call all this stuff. It's the crime against us. We have I've been telling you all this notice here, this news they want to put out. You do have to go research the facts of it all. I'm not saying that this is the end-all be-all statement. This is coming from an opinion of some writer through some website. But I remember the reports and the stories coming out, and then the soldiers were integrated, and the soldiers are the ones that got in trouble first. So, that must be the source. And they didn't stop it, folks, to let me know. I don't need to really know a whole lot more. Well, the facts were there already for us. If anybody, or hopefully more, a group of us would have gotten together to call that atrocity out then, to really nail this Clinton-Bush cabal of corruption that goes everywhere and just sucks up money from people underneath the illusion of caring for other people. It's just, we would have started to begin to assert ourselves as the people that won't take it anymore. But we don't do it. So here we have it, folks. The UN is willing to kill you. Now let's just do a slight extension. They're also, I reported this long time ago, they're the brokers of the global multinational pharma and the bio and the trade things. They are the part of their arm is the one that declares the pandemic. I told you that was invented. They usually rarely say epidemic. They call it a pandemic. I've been through all of this. These people are the creators of it all. How can we continue to allow any integration with this organization? Remember, it brings on the fraud of climate change. Is there nothing beneath these people? I kind of add that odd question mark at the end. I hope you heard it. I hope I tried. I don't do those things real well, but I hope you heard the odd question. It's a rhetorical point. Your existence right now is controlled by this organization if you don't know it or not. And we did our lawsuit to show you that it is. It's right in your... We did it only to one state, but it extends through the leveraged funding that comes from the federal government through its adoption of sustainable development, which I read to you as the Bar Association also adopts to promote at every point. This is the same legal advisor to the UN that oversaw the UN kill people, folks. To me, I mean, this is just, I don't know what else to, again, I have no word, I have no words. If this is not self-evident of how evil this whole condition is and has been thrust on us, I don't know what more to say than that. What else is there to say that we may sit? I'm going to say may sit as crickets against it as well. What we don't rise up against is astonishing to me. When I come here every week to show you the news is telling you of all the things you could rise up against, because it's the evidence is here of the crime against us by people that are local to you who believe that that crime is not. And that's just this deviance that's happened. And that's a slip of the principles. See, behind the woodshed, we're trying to get those principles we lost. Those principles are supposed to be held for a reason. I try to tell you, don't look at the past and say and throw it all out if it was a good thing. I think soil disposal with settlement and peace is a good thing, given the history that we are told, at least, is amongst people. That so-called human nature is definitely a fallen nature. Peace and settlement in an organization that was supposed to sit in neutrality to protect that peace and settlement sounds like a pretty good idea. And then we weren't diligent to keep that, and we get to the caucusocracy, don't we? The worst rises to the top. And folks, at the global level, where everyone's focusing their attention to this entity, this is as the definition, the caucusocracy we talk about at the global side. And they're willing to kill people. They've admitted it. This is not an opinion. I'm going on a lot longer than I was thinking here, but I can't tell you how much of an insult this is that I suspect not much is going to be responded to, that I want you to understand. It has to be these things have to be responded to. Our lack of response allows them to continue. Our lack of objection to this, to someone who may be in a seated decision, and pushing on them until they go someplace else, if that's the way this thing works, back up the rung, because that's the system we'd allowed on us right now that has to be done. We have to start to do. I guess the point is, ultimately, it just struck me, just flash, if these people at the global stage that trickles down to you are willing to kill people, is there anything that comes as a product of the people that agree and are accessories to this that could be any good at all? And if it's not, why are you going to be quiet about any of it? And behind the woodshed, I've tried to explain how we go about understanding certain things. It may be subtle, which, I was just talking to that guy here this weekend. We spent a lot of time after the meeting. I was explaining some things. He had some questions. And I said, what I'm saying to you is so subtle. Don't disregard that. What you think you see in the world and how we deal with that may not look a whole lot different, but you have to really look close at what we're doing, because what we're doing is starting to work, even though we're only using a handful of people to do it. And so it's over that, that subtlety is overwhelmed by the mass noise. In other words, you can't find the signal for the noise that's out there. And that's the division. That's these things that come up and tell you, these people want to kill you. They're capable of killing you, and willfully and knowingly so. That's crime, willful and knowing. You've got the elements of a crime. It's not that hard to get this up. Put this together as a criminal charge. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to go to anybody that's in the system. Remember, the attorneys are in on it, so you're not going to go anywhere. That's a judge or an attorney or an attorney general, war terminology here, that's really going to do anything. You saw what they'll do for the cabals. Clinton, they twist what they're looking at it. They make that legitimate, and then she doesn't have to answer to what was a presumptive obligation against her for having to have a secure server. Forget what was happening around the emails. She failed to have a presumptive obligation. She failed a presumptive obligation to have a secure server. That's a crime. But they tended to get your focus off the point. This one's pretty direct. They've admitted that they're willing to kill you. Now what? What are you going to do about it? You got to settle down. You really got to think about that. And if you can't do something directly about that, I'm asking you to consider what short of actually choking off these people, or as I tell you, cause the building to fall over and push it into the water and then head it in the direction of Europe where it belongs. What short of that can you do? I'm saying your response to this is local, because the policies of the people that will kill you are actually in place and functioning in your local town. They're the policies, the police, the policy, the military control that I've been explaining to you, that now is admitted in one more issue. If you had questions about it at all, they're willing to kill you at an international level. They didn't have any due process there, so if you thought, also as I've been telling you, NDAA removed the due process requirement by claiming that the sovereignty could move into extrajudicial, it's non-judicial, but it's extrajudicial authority, understand it's all the same beast we're looking at there. I'm sure there was no meeting that you were involved with, all those people that are dead in Haiti, or the Haitians themselves that were put in a meeting that were going to be part of that consensus. You see how that works? The guys that the people that are going to be hurting by it aren't going to be part of that meeting. Why? Because it's not profitable, is it? But they'll kill you. Here's the admission. I'm just, I don't have words. I'm not intelligent enough. I don't even have cuss words for this. If I was going to go having cuss words. It's a speechlessness that comes over me. I hope you too. I mean, really, think about that, folks. Whether I can really stop this or not, I don't know. I mean, what am I going to do? We're doing our best. We've outed that their policies are treason. What more can I do? I just need people to recognize that in our case. I need more people to embrace that and advance that point, that proof. It's not an opinion now. For all y'all that are listening to me that still think that Agenda 21 was a joke, I've read the documents that shows that it's valid. Our court case declares it to be existent. It's not an illusion. It's really a tool being used against us to dissettle us, to remove the peace. It's a breach. The policies are a breach of local law, and it necessarily needs to be arrested. The problem is the system has grown up around you that are the agents of that, as I've explained over and over and over. And there's ways to go after it. Not everyone that's there is a problem, and not everybody that could be there is a problem. And so it takes some time to work this back out. We are an occupied people. We're infiltrated and surrounded, and you have to understand the dynamic of that. If I've never, ever been in a war, if I never, ever was in what I thought, outwardly an occupied territory, and if only my ideas were through the movies I may have seen, you act and do a whole lot different when there's an enemy around you than you would think that, being underneath the delusion that you're free and not a slave to it all. And so, how do you destroy the illusion? It's just that there's nothing there to destroy. You have to find the reality and start responding to that. And I don't know, I didn't really go and I should have researched more of this, but what comes to me to say, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, folks. You have to find out that your reality that we've been imposed on is a valley of the shadow of death. And I feared no evil. I'm going to suggest to you that I went through that sense. This is a valley of the shadow of death. Think about these terms in what I tell you is the undead, the legal entity, what they might call the zombie, the functioning entity that's not actually live but functions, the undead, the shadow of death. we can look and we can interpret these things in the books that we've been told also. We don't, I don't get too locked in anymore. I just try to find out what was I'm trying to be told here, the truth that's in here. You will eventually have to figure out you're in the valley of the shadow of death, and you have to fear no evil. You're surrounded by it. And once you come to terms with that, it became me. What I do. Not who I am. Who I am is that little guy I keep telling you that just really is wanting to see us be good to ourselves. Wants to wonder after the wonder. That's the little guy inside me, still hanging in. But the doing, when we find out we're in the valley of the shadow of death, has to become your reality. That eliminates all illusion. In fact, the illusion is the valley that you're in, that you find out is the enemy you shall not fear. And for those of you that are offended on a biblical passage, don't be. I'm talking in points of my experience and how it related to and how it can be focused in the world to explain it to us better than ourselves or the internet. This has been a long-term thing. This is in the nature of the creation of what we're having to be today. If those, again, don't want to be creative creationists, okay, fine. However we got here, it's been the overriding rule of law. It's been the natural law that there is people in the world that are willing to kill other people in Haiti under a color of benevolence. And their army is vast and wide, which is the valley of the shadow of death that will kill you, that you cannot fear. And once you see it as the illusion, you realize it's just a crime. And that's what you have to arrest. Whatever that crime is you see, however it comes to you. I'm not saying I'm out there to be a go-getter to do it. I'm not going to be that overachiever that way that Grammy Mary wants to say she is for having so many stalkers on Facebook. All right? We're talking about it's the minimum of what we need to do in the reality of what's up against us as a historic and literal and factual condition. Maintain the illusion, and you can believe you need to destroy it. Find out it's an illusion, and I'm saying when you find out it's an illusion that's a false front that's being generated by some entity, you have to collapse it. Once you collapse it, there's nothing between you and that except your ability to maneuver against it. Finding out and having an admission. As I said, I talked about getting admissions and confessions. Stop making it up. We don't have to. These people are criminals. They're easy to find out. We have to formalize our response to it if we want to get off the revolution, the wheel that we've been on historically, that brings us back to all the stages of the so-called democracy that brings us back again over and over. And now we get to this little tool they told us was the Second Amendment to stop and abolish the government. I said, we're so far past that, we better come up with a better tool that they didn't invent that we do have. We can always throw ourselves to the winds and run that Second Amendment out. We can always do that again. I've been asking us after I see all this, we need to be a whole lot more organized, a whole lot more circumspect, a whole lot more purposeful on what we really need to have, not what we've been gave. And to me, although I can't really do much at the UN level, to me, having an admission that someone just murdered thousands and thousands of people inside an organization, a cover. Let's talk about the nested felonies here. Is not okay. And I'm trying to, I hope I'm telling you here, not just trying. This spirit is in your locale, right where you live. What did I tell you about your water? I said, folks, it's in the books already. Your water is poison. They're not going to tell you. And I told you, I gave you the example of it with Fukushima, how they drove that big and bad. And it was nothing. It was there to cover up the crimes they've been doing against you under what? Regulation, license to do so. The agreement that the government would forbear a criminality against you to some level, that those people in there, those criminals, psychopaths, the worst among us have decided is fair to do. So I think enough on that. It just, again, speechless. I don't have words for it. I've said a lot here, but I don't have the words to describe the heinousness of this and our requirement to be responding to it wherever it pops up. And this, what they'll do this to you at the international level. They just move into your country and kill you off. They're doing it to you locally, and there's no scruple against it, I guess is the point, unless it's your scruple against it. And that's not going to happen stuck in your head or at the end of your keyboard in a chat room or even going to a signboard on the street. You have to put yourself, not in harm's way, but you have to put yourself out in the proper way, bring your, as I say, the law, the black and white. There's a law there. Don't quit dismissing it. Bring it against their obligations and duties. Be right. Be on the factual truth. Don't aggrandize anything. Don't worry about going back in history of all the authorities. They're there. They're already written. That's why what you see today is here, because of them. That's implied that those authorities exist to allow you to act. You don't have to go through the lineage. When you go through a lot of the lineage on their request, they're wasting your time, and you haven't called them out. They're a criminal. They don't have a right to waste your time. And so, again, I'm really, I went back and looked at the title. I'm speechless. I can't even talk about how heinous this is. And it's happening, folks. Do you understand this? It's happening in our world today. And everyone wants to say it's somewhere else. I'm telling you, folks, the codes, the rules, the people, the bar association. Where is there not a bar association member with anybody that's listening to me? The Bar Association gets its marching orders from the ABA. The ABA gets it from the International Bar Association, which got it in history through the Inns of Court. And they are the legal advisor to the UN. How much more integrated was this enemy against you than that? And there's others, but that's the one that's easy to point out. Enough on that, I guess. I'm stunned. So, getting over to something that's a little more subtle in the news, the notice. I told you, and I'm still on the record, I'm going to hold to this, folks. I've been kind of out on a limb a little bit. I said it was as plausible on this international scale of corruption and gamemanship. It was as plausible that Russia figured out this thing in Turkey, advanced it to Erdogan so they could timely respond to a possible coup that was being planned, or not, doesn't matter, and gain the favor of Erdogan and created a condition that he could pivot, like I was suggesting. All the way till today, it's still as plausible, even against the experts and the whistleblowers and the so-called news people that are out there. I can take the same so-called facts they use and show they're neutral to the point of who done it. And so we then go and step back and who is going to gain the most and who has gained the most. And guess what? Over the last few weeks, if it's not only been a week, it's been happening so quick I don't remember. Here it was, a quick little note. I don't even have a story on it. So excuse me for relying a ton on this because it just seems to fit my agenda, I want to tell you. The plausibility that Russia was the mastermind of the plan that worked this all through. Don't forget, they told you. They said in the news, they told it wherever they can, we look at the needs and the wants of everybody we're going to deal with, and we look and we resolve it to the best of all the parties. They told us that about how they're going through and resolving the Syria issue when they first finally stepped in to try and assert the authority. And you saw how proper that was. It looked proper, to me at least, on how they went about doing it. That's been abiding the thought in my mind. I said it's as plausible with all the things you're hearing about. NATO done it, Gulen done it. That Russia was the oracle, if you will, to Erdogan, who was intelligent enough to act in response to it. Then he was told what the bigger game was, and he has definitely amplified that advantage. And it was an intelligence advantage. It was on an interesting little site. I don't know how I found it. China Xinhua News, China News. It was one little note without a report. Breaking. Turkish PM says Russia saw danger posed by U.S.-based cleric Gulen long before Turkey. I copied that to tell you today. This is back quite a few days ago that came out. It came and went. If Turkey saw the danger posed, that means Turkey's been on it like I told you they were. They're looking all over this thing big time. And I think, again, and I'm going to assert it continuously here until I see different, it's as reasonable and plausible with all the evidence that we've heard, how it all come down, what we all don't know, that Russia and their intelligence saw and had it down. And they advanced this knowledge to Erdogan. And out of gratefulness, if nothing else, you see the pivot in a week. And you see the dynamic changing almost immediately. That Turkey announces a more active role in Syria conflict also would not be inconsistent with the goal of Syria, who it has been fighting, or Russia. But now they can use a common theme here. They are all against destroying or dividing Syria with the Kurd question. And I'm not taking sides at all. I'm just saying this seems to be what's going down, the facts of this area. You saw how quickly they pivoted. I think we're back to the possibility. I wasn't incorrect in my observation that Russia played a very interesting gamemanship here. And it worked out to everybody's benefit. See, it didn't. Benefit doesn't mean you have to take an advantage. It just means you don't get harmed. NATO didn't get harmed, obviously, more than credibility. Gulen didn't get harmed yet. He's just a pawn as well. And with this gamemanship, you start raising up this high and seeing how this works internationally, I don't know what part he really plays. I'm even wondering the one that promotes, the whistleblower that promotes Gladio B is not partly also Gladio B. Yeah, I'm pausing. I want you to consider these things. So, a very interesting dynamic. Nothing I've said has been exhausted yet. From my little perspective behind the woodshed, it's as plausible and now even more plausible. Turkey did a pivot because he was given the future by the oracle of Russian intelligence, and they are really a master of what they're doing. NATO's on its way down. NATO has been. They've been trying to figure out a way to take out NATO, to make down the relevance of NATO. They're now making this thing about the nuclear weapons done in Turkey. Turkey's going to straddle a fence, folks. Don't get into all that. That's just food for your consumption to get you off the point. Ultimately, where it goes, I don't know. My uncle a long time ago said this is going to be moving. This is back in the 60s, late 60s and 70s. He's saying, you watch how the geopolitics moves in through to adjust to exactly what we're told in about Armageddon. And you're seeing that. China now came in. It's a scary thing to see, but it's supposed to be by a plan that's beyond us. So, okay, I can't do much about that. I can do a lot about the example I am and are. All three of us, me, myself, and I, we are in this world as we move into these times of insanity, where you find out that the so-called benefactor in the UN, where all the agents, now you see why Saudi Arabia can be the biggest executor of people and become part of the Human Rights Council, head of the Human Rights Council. These people are incorrigible beyond. These are just criminal organizations, and all these countries are in it, so don't think I'm favoring anybody. This is just what goes on in front of our faces. You see, the mastermind here is running complete chaos, complete anarchy. The fact that the plan, you see at Agenda 2030, which came out of the UN, which is willing to kill you, we see it now, wants you to be moving. They want you migrating, you animals. They don't care about this. If they'll kill you, they don't care about destroying your way of life. They don't care about destroying your governments and what was there to protect you. They don't care about making you believe falsely on what you thought it was, so you pick something else. You buy into what they have got, what they're selling. This is a fascinating view from my perspective of the truth of all this. Beyond names, beyond titles. This is just the fact of what's happening. Like I said, I look at the news as notice. It's just a fact of the fact of the notice to you. This is what's happening. My point has been, okay, they've told you now, what are you going to do about it? So NATO being on the ropes about this is a pretty slick move for Russia. I can almost see this, now that I see it this way, I can see how that it all worked out so smooth, how that worked out. That Russia could see this condition and could play that scenario out to do exactly what we're seeing happen right now. That this little blurb that a Turkey PM said that Russia had been watching this condition, although they focus on the patsy, shows us that Russia was looking, weren't they? Even though they came out, remember, they came out and said, oh, there must be some internal strife in Turkey. And they took a hands-off little statement approach about that point. No, folks, they were in on this. They knew all about it. It wasn't a question that there was a little bit of strife. The experts were right. There was going to be an overthrow. But it just happened to be triggered before, maybe even the ones that were making the overthrow thought it could. And that was a little bitty takedown there to the benefit of those you see now benefiting. And not actually harming anybody in some regard. Well, except for those that are now going to be under the thumb of a tyrant in Erdogan to now utilize the advantage to take everybody out that he ever had a question about. Remember, he called for the death penalty before he started to see the reality of what was going on. Right or wrong, or proper or improper, coup or not. He knew what was going on. They knew they had a problem. So he's taken in full advantage. And maybe he should. I don't know. Like I said, I'd hate to have been those troops that were played for the tools they were, the patsies they were. I explained all that on my past broadcast. So this is not working so well for NATO. But I think Turkey's going to take a pivot. Their pivot actually is a pivot to put their foot on the other side of the fence so that they can work both angles. They'll try not to insult anybody, but give themselves a better position. But also in this week, they're starting to show the question about NATO. It's not really what it's supposed to be. Remember, this is all started by Zio West, too, in this UN thing. So don't underestimate this move, what it might start to be doing. Jeremy Corbyn is now called out onto the media, called for NATO to be closed down and members to give up, go home, and go away. Now, this is the same call to people that are in the military to stop enforcing the policies of people that you now know will kill other people just 'cause. Not just cause, just 'cause. Don't forget, the UN is that peacekeeping force that allows the raping and the plunder and the theft of the people and allows them to be the illusion of a peacekeeper buffer between two antagonists that once they get into your country, you're probably not living longer than 6 months as they infiltrate your whole system. Don't put away these things. This is showing you the method of skullduggery that these people are willing to do under the benefice of humanitarian law. Look at that. That Jeremy Corbyn says that NATO is no good. Thing is, he's being called out for saying this in 2014. That he said in 2014 that NATO should have been really dismantled back in 1990 because they're used as a tool to advance the theft of minerals, essentially energy. And that's the least of it, folks. So I think he's even holding back. But this NATO question comes on. And now you're in the wrong side of history here. You're going to watch maybe some action coming down. With the United States backing it up, it may not get too far as an actual full-fledged thing, but the consciousness, the awareness is now coming that these agents in the field advancing these things are really dangerous, reckless, and they're murderers. They're killers, and we see that already. But no one really wants to take that to task. No one wants to really stand out and say, "No, you guys are just outright murderers. I don't care what you use an excuse." As I've been trying to tell you, when they went extrajudicial and they use the necessity of the war on terror, someone needs to step up and say, "No, that was the war of terror you're using as a pretext. You don't have that right. You can't rely on necessity. Now the burden's on you to show that it is something that beyond what you have created." And wherever their hands are paying for the mercenaries, wherever their policies are that allow apartheid or an abuse of people or the support of the UN that kill people in Haiti, while George Bush and Clinton foundations are involved to get you to pay to help those people. You remember that fraud on everybody. These are the things that have to be shut down. These are the war of terror statement is a pretext for the war that's the war on terror is the pretext of the war of terror on you to control every aspect by groups of people now proven that they will kill you with this information. They'll take this information and they'll kill you. And if we didn't get advance notice of the extrajudicial ability of the so-called president, the unqualified one, to have his cabinet, without his actual say, make the decision, and a bureaucrat's decision to kill you extrajudicially by drone or otherwise. If that didn't also amplify what the UN is just now admitted to, I don't know what else to say. These things are all the evidence that we are needing to stop our own excuse against this crime against us. As I've said, stop walking with that ring in your nose that you walk as an accessory to the crime against you when you don't call it out. Why I also told you it's kind of interesting and fun in a way to be able to use 18 USC sub 4 and 18 USC sub 3 that says if you don't call it out, then you're a felon. Now you get to throw that shield on you. If I didn't do this, then I'd be out. I'd be the one, if it's ever found out that I knew this and didn't tell somebody, I'm a felon. Now it's real hard. Now you're a witness. So they start messing with you. You're also in a position not only of having to do the duty under the law and that so-called whistleblower, which they're attacking, which is another type of crime, but they're also tampering with a witness, aren't they? It's another felony. If they do any kind of discussion to you by the mail, that's a fraud of the mails, right? So more of these compounding crimes on these people. Does anybody identify this and list it up and actually work it up and make a record of it to protect themselves? Not many, if anybody. Anybody I know does. But this war of terror against you. Folks, think how much more terrorizing can it be to understand that the UN of all people, of all our entities, it was willing and able and allowed to go into another country and kill you. And all these people agree with that. They're all underneath it. They all agree with that. That the information that they get against you becomes more and more serious against this. The more information that you give them becomes more serious. The more they steal becomes more serious. And yet you'll see them lie. They'll support. They're making a record of their legitimacy. I guess if you haven't noticed that, this is my other problem, is that while I'm watching them making the record of the legitimacy of their war of terror on you through the war on terror, you're not making a record to balance that or challenge it or defeat it. Well, I was talking to you before. Someone step up and affect it. We attacked the sustainable development. It's down. I mean, it's proven to be a treason against the people. All that people have to do is go to that court case, Jefferson Mining District versus Kitzhopper 2013, and throw that in their argument about the fact that all the courts and the judiciary and the Bar Association is committing treason in this country, and their court system is a facade to prohibit people from having remedy. And that's in the start. It goes on and on from here. That this record making that they do, see, everything's like in the Federal Register. You don't understand what that means? It means that they're giving the world notice of how they're going to proceed, giving you opportunity, notice, time, opportunity, and place, the due process, opportunity to respond, to tell them they're being criminals. How many people of you do that? Granted, I can't hit all of them, but we do it kind of regularly, I think. It is a lot of work, but that's the reality we live in. We give ourselves a place to say that we have an objection, and you may not see it because a lot of people don't look specific to our subject matter areas. But we are having that difference happening, folks. They're not making plans. They're changing their plans. They're delaying their plans. Plans don't come out. The action, the people, like I was saying at the mining district meeting, anyone that I know that's a miner is working. Well, unless they ran out of water. Everybody that I don't know that I hear about is complaining about not working or thinking they're getting away while they're working with breaking the law. And the distinction between the two is the people I know understand the law and how to get it in a record before they become a criminal or become susceptible to criminal activity. And that is the shield that I keep telling you about. That's the information you want. That's the data you want to generate. Not the one that they happenstance collect on you. Not the record they make that says it legitimizes this condition. And we see evidence of that. Very interesting. And it's interesting with how they report this stuff. And the Guardian has to be here chastised a lot. The bulk data collection vital to prevent terrorism in UK report finds. The bulk collection of personal data by British spy agencies is vital in preventing terrorist attacks. An independent review of draft security legislation has found. An independent review has found. Here, first paragraph. Second paragraph, David Anderson, QC, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, concluded that laws giving MI5, MI6, and GCHQ the right to gather large volumes of data from members of the public have a, quote, clear operational purpose. Well, first of all, that's not saying whether it's right. Okay, but let's go back to the first point that I was really referring to, the first issue. Independent review. Independent reviewer. And then he has this little capital Q, capital C after his name. What the heck is that? You know, wherever I looked around here, I couldn't find and verify what that was in the study, in the reports anywhere. I have an idea what it is before I even got to searching it, so I knew what I was looking at. But I wanted to see whether or not they would actually explain what a QC is, as I interpret it in British law, or British culture, whatever it is, hierarchy. Now, some of you may know. The QC stands for Queen's Counsel. That's why I was highlighting independent review. How is he independent counsel? How is he independent reviewer? How is he not involved when he's the Queen's Counsel? And that's a bar member, essentially. How is that independent? It is independent. Thank you, Solomon. It's not non-dependent. How is that separate from the politics and organization established of the United Kingdom? That he would come out and say it has a clear operational purpose. You think, oh yeah, all this military stuff has clear operational purpose. That's kind of like an oxymoron statement in a way. That your whole point about testing for that is kind of dumb, but that's not the point, is it? The point is they have someone that's supposed to be independent. They promote it in the first two paragraphs, and they actually go through and promote all the time that it's independent. And in fact, the reality is, and markonthebeast.yahoo.com, if anybody can find the proof otherwise, it's not independent at all. It's the voice of the Council of the Queen. It represents, you look and you find out about this guy. In fact, I'll go right there. I did go down and find it. David Anderson QC. He puts it everywhere. It's like Esquire, ESQ. Titles of nobility, for those of you that understand the 13th Amendment problem, that you don't read anymore. You go through and read what he's about. David's practice. So he's not, he keeps practicing. Practices with your life. Practices with his opinions. He's built his expertise in European Union law. I won't go on. He's an attorney. He's a bar member, essentially. He's an Inns of Court. Whatever the heck he's a Queen's Counsel. He's part of the government he's looking for a shingle. He's looking for a knighthood, folks. I mean, come on. And yet they're promoted by the Guardian as being independent reviewer, notwithstanding the independent actually is telling you he's dependent. Team depends. You read this thing along, and they told the public that this data collection is needed because of the war on terror. It's operationally required. and you believe it was an independent, you've just believed in your servitude, period. You've just agreed that the military rules your life. And the decision, the record they made that you believed, they got you to agree to, was one of their own. And this is how simply this all works. This consent thing, this consensus building thing, this buy-in, this is how the world works. They get you to not object, that's consensus, and they get what they want. The outcome they have built. The goal they set is accomplished because they got you to become and maintain a cricket status on your abilities, on your rights that they don't have title to, but they claim. This is no different than what I deal with when we deal with a dispute resolution. They fabricate the dispute. They make the determinations based on their goals to the outcome they want. The solution is the fulfillment of that outcome. They get you to buy into it by you not presenting any kind of an argument or just disregarding the argument that you provide, and then wait for you to fail to continue to expose them. Now, typically that response would have to go to the courts. I've told you got to eliminate the judges because who are they? They're nothing more than the people that started the problem. And you out that. You break it down. It's the illusion, and you call it out. What's transparent to everybody else, you call out. That here's the point for us in America. Everyone wants to know, what does it mean to me here? If this is the best answer this expert has for why UK, whoever these people are in the UK, can collect data for the necessity of terrorism, it isn't better in the United States or anywhere else they're doing it. It's ratified by their own kind, if I can say that. Remember, the race of lawyers was the definition for race. Forget this color nonsense. Forget the hyphenated existence. You were not part of the definition of race. The race of lawyers is. Where'd I get that? Doubleday Dictionary, 1974. Funny how these things stick with you. I can't remember the plant I saw last year that I'm trying to figure out again this year, but I can remember that I learned 30 years ago. Amazing what becomes important. United States has the same under foundation authority. None. This is to me evidence of what I've been telling you before. Somebody stand up and challenge this necessity called the war of terror as a pretext for the war on terror as a pretext for the war of terror against you and globally. If this is the best this expert, this is a high-level guy within their system, can come up with, the United States is no less the condition. Germany, the EU, NATO, all of this is no less that condition. Even in Russia, no less the condition that terrorism is not a foundation that their own kind said is, that's not. How do you destroy that illusion? I just did. I called it out. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the crime against you? But they pass it to the point where they pass it off as authority. And everybody buys in. They agree and they shut up and and the consensus is the consensus of science and climate change. It's not fact. They just get you to agree with the illusion. What's the term oh darn it, it's not coming to me. It's there to say it's there, but not enough to tell you what it is. It's the what you abandon reality for a moment. There's a better way to say that. I don't have that term, but you just kind of get into the movie you're watching and you kind of abandon the fact that it's not the movie. Smart people in the chat will have that term. That's what they get us to do. They get us to agree that the movie is more than a movie, and we sit and we enjoy what's happening, even if that enjoyment is watching thousands of Haitians die. And yet, somewhere, there's some pushback. Again, using this as evidence of the changing battlefield, the conditions are going on, things you can use. Judge deals blow to FBI, DOJ secrecy over terror task force operations. So I wanted to point out here that there's a limit, even under FOIA, even under what they think they can withhold from you, even in the necessity part. You have to learn the subtleties of these things, as I said earlier. This is very subtle how you approach this kind of warfare. It's very subtle how they get your consent by your non-action. Very subtle how that works. How they rely on your nature to be apathetic. Judge deals blow to FBI and DOJ secrecy. This was a FOIA that was filed. So this is one thing I'm speaking to all you that want to file a FOIA to find out what documents are out there that create an evidence, a body of evidence. The court made a delineation. Now, I don't think it's a proper delineation because they made an arbitrary and capricious delineation on a data purpose that they allowed in the allowance. So this is not a perfect decision, but it's here to tell you. I wanted to show you a line can be drawn even in necessity. I'm telling you, start to look for that. That's where they can't deal with this. That's where you can prevail. Today's ruling deals a blow in the unjustifiable secrecy surrounding counter-terror operations at the time when the JTTF's activities are producing controversial prosecutions, I'll get it out, and uncomfortable headlines nationwide. In her 17-page opinion, United States Court Judge Allison Burroughs, herself a former U.S. attorney, ruled that the FBI improperly invoked Exemption 7E of the FOIA statute, FOIA statute. This is federal now. FOIA is federal. Remember that open records is state. So get that right, folks. I was seeing some chats weeks and weeks ago getting that confused. Don't get it confused because they use those errors as evidence to delay your information. You're looking at a court case here where they were denied the FOIA information and had to sue to get it. I've been almost close here, but I was able to convince them not to force me to go to court. When we talked to the Forest Service years ago, I told you all about that. How they denied there was anything in our file for our mining claim. And I said, well, there has to be at least the 4 letters I've sent you. So that's what you've just told me is a fraud and a lie. And you're posting to me through the U.S. mails to tell me that's a mail fraud. And I'm going to go after the one officer that told me that was the case if you don't give me my information. And we received our information. So I just did it on a process, logical, rational process side. I didn't have to go to this extent, but if they would have went and not given us the information, I would have had to do this next step, which is to sue and get the judge to say that what they did was not proper underneath the FOIA. And in this particular case, there's an FBI, or there's an exemption actually under 7E that they can resort to. And in this case was about them not giving information for that exemption, and the judge is coming back and saying, well, you can't extend that exemption to this thing, these that were being requested. In response to our records request, the FBI claimed the basic information from the Massachusetts JTTF, including the number of agents on its staff, details about its supplies, overtime policy, the budgets were exempt from disclosure pursuant to Exemption 7E. To FOIA, Judge Burroughs disagreed. The court finds the FBI has not satisfied its burden in demonstrating that Exemption 7E applies to those staffing and budget materials. Now, this was an important thing to understand. This is one of the other subtleties that gets by a lot of people that I see on the internet. That I told you, look for who has the burden. You have to always understand who has the burden, and you got to stick the burden on whoever. And if it's on you, you have to fulfill it. As I talked to you about pre-plea remedies of avoidance prior to plea. Or if it's on the government, don't answer for them and don't let them get away with not fulfilling the burden. Find out what the burden is, and you focus on that. You don't have to focus on anything else. So here the judge is saying you didn't meet the government's burden. The government didn't meet its burden. It's not just carte blanche. We say and it goes. Like eminent domain. Everyone thinks it's, we say we want to claim the property and we'll get to take it. No, that's not how it works. If you don't know that, you miss the subtlety in the case. That this burden is sitting there for you in the future to understand. And I say these burdens are all over the place, and these are the things we use. For instance, on the ground, coordination. we know it's the burden of the agency to seek out all people who might be affected that are within the 43 U.S.C. 1712 provision. It's all governments and districts and political subdivisions and mining districts and all that. It's their burden to seek out. They cannot rely on the fact that they didn't and they just make stuff up. We use that. They failed the burden to seek out. They then showed that they intended not to utilize input when we showed up despite the lack of notice that they were seeking out. And they disregarded what we imposed, what we stated where they failed the law. They disregarded that. So we set up the failure the failure links to the chain of evidence against them, the burden they had. So there's an applicable, straightforward application to these words. I looked for these words in the statutes to say, okay, what are they talking about? Who has these burdens? Who has to do what when? Where are we in this that they have to or not? She explains why the FBI invocation of law enforcement exemption doesn't fly. The FBI has not made the threshold showing that the withheld information, none more recent than 2014, would disclose, quote, techniques and procedures, close quote, for law enforcement investigations or prosecutions. To me, this was a huge disclosure. It's in the law, I've read it, but to have a judge actually highlight it, it really is a huge thing to see. This FOIA exemption only regards techniques and procedures. Now you should take your FOIA and look at it. Am I requesting a technique and procedure that they may use a claim of exemption for? And if I am, reframe it so it's not, and then explain how they can't do it. It's not how they can't say it's a technique. And you try to trump, I can't use this word anymore without sounding political. You trump their ability to use the exemption in your request. This is the record that you're making ahead of time. You learn what the requirements are and you learn to protect against a defense. And this is what, like our lawsuit, I had to look at that very carefully. That's one of the very careful things you look at. What defenses might they create in your complaint that you should address as a fact and statement to defeat it before it gets legs? Put the grounds for the dismissal or the suppression of that request in the paperwork before you go. These are all part of the tactics and strategies that you use when you're using this, and you learn these more and better, and you start to understand how to confine this discussion, which most people don't do. I read it all the time. I read their paperwork all the time. They don't understand any of this. Not a judgment. This is a fact, to me it's just okay. Well, you kind of opened yourself up to that now. Now you got to go deal with it. Or no, you opened yourself up and didn't have a proper cause, and then you didn't respond to that properly, so they won. They won on these so-called technicalities. So we now see these FOIAs the information's exempt by techniques and procedures. That was a very constraining condition. Now they'll expand it by creative word use, but this is the focus. Can they escape, or can you confine them? She goes on to say these historic generic staffing and budget information withheld by the FBI, such as the number of parking spots allocated to the Massachusetts JTTF or the maximum overtime pay, does not disclose how the Massachusetts JTTF actually goes about investigating crimes. That's the definition. As Judge Seindland of the South District of New York recently observed, quote, the terms, techniques, and procedures refer to specific methods of law enforcement, not policy and budgetary choices about the assignment of personnel. Now, again, time ticks. I'll just explain all this. I can go on. There's more to read. The point was on all this is that you look at the delineation the judge, for as incompetent as that court is, because it's a USDC court, I needed to mention that, but I'm not getting focus on that problem. I just want to remind you that I look at all this stuff, and I hope you put in your mind the same thing, because that still needs to be questioned as well. She's still underneath this administrative approach through something that's perceived to be within Washington, D.C.'s jurisdiction and authority. She's making the determination, and she would have competency if that's the limit. But see how they extend out, the FBI extends it out, and they get to look over the whole country, which I would challenge. But they now define what these techniques and procedures are, and they don't extend to these other things. Is what the subtlety that you must look and read for, that when you're making requests or you're making claims that you have to, against the violation or calling out a violation, you learn to see the point and confine what they use as an escape or for an immunity. They are their privilege, what they call the privilege. They don't give you many, but their privilege. You learn to see that's their door, and you learn to lock it before you go anywhere authoritative. In other words, your record shows as a closed door. Your communication shows they can't use that door. So when you get to go claim it, you can say on the record they can't. And you defeat them before you even go there where you have to go. Is what one of the techniques I do and use, and we close all the doors. We seek out all the places they can even ooze out the cracks as best we can find them. We pitch that boat up really well so that there's nothing that they can squeeze through. And then we press our point and we call them out for the fact the evidence of the record shows their culpability. That this FOIA is a big deal because a lot of people have to start with FOIAs. But to me, there's a big, what do you call it? It's extensive how to apply what's being said here. And the finiteness, as you heard the FBI and the Comey cabal protecting Hillary, although they focused on the wrong thing, they did focus on something. And no one called them out for the crime, the fraud, the misinterpretation that they did to not focus on what I consider to be a more proper thing, which is what I said before was the positive obligation prior to using the server to make sure that server was secure, not the content that was in it. It would be by definition anything coming through that server would be insecure then, wouldn't it? And then knowledge is not needed there either. And you saw that it wasn't needed in the statute. So it made my interpretation appeared to me to be more consistent interpretation than the fabricated illusion that they put before everybody, everyone's consumption that so far that I can see everyone has bought into. Not so much that they don't now use the technique, but we'll see how that works for anybody lesser. But so DOJ has been deals a blow by a so-called judge here, possibly administratively. Maybe that is the proper court of jurisdiction. I want to discuss that. More importantly, administratively, FOIA has restrictions. It has things you can do. I notice lots of people don't really read the FOIA to really understand how to get around. In fact, I think it was a discussion we had in the chat. Well, how do you get around the fees? Well, it's real simple. Go read. You can see what they exempt from having to pay fees. And a lot of times I just say this is in preparation for a lawsuit to expose crimes and civil violations to my rights. We got to make it private to you, and you got to be legitimate in it. Again, I don't talk about making up stuff. We got enough. There's no reason to make anything up. Actually, you don't. If you're having to make stuff up, you're a pretender. You're a pretender. You're a waste of your own time. You don't have to pretend. It's right there. It's how fast this would work. They give you everything that you are willing to ask for. It's there. And when they don't want to give it to you and they're wrong on the wrong side of the law, you have the time to press, or not the time, you have the opportunity. They've given you the remedy to press it. The problem is that's the violation because that's a delay. Now they'll never look at this way. I always write it in my papers. This delay you've caused is a delay. It means injustice. The very fact of your delay, to use this as an excuse, I then make on my subsequent communication declare the crime of the injustice. That's a due process violation as well. So you just build on these people for not doing what they ought to do. You put in effect what the law says, contrary to what some attorney might say or threaten, or some official relying on that advice. That the DOJ is dealt another blow, a massive blow to debtors' prisons. Poor people can't be held when they can't afford bail. Now, you know what's been going on. We know this is the courts have been going in and creating all your liabilities, as regulatory liabilities, and these supposed criminal violations that nobody in the seats of decision ever get charged with. And we've got our evidence of all that. That's not even opinion either. That the DOJ itself actually came out and said to have someone who's poor, who can't afford bail, and keep them in custody is a 14th Amendment violation. Now, don't get all upset about the 14th Amendment. For those of you that do a lot of the study, this happens to be what the reality is and how they treat you. There's a whole lot around this that I have a lot of, my mind just is all twisting on this because there's a lot of ways you don't even get involved at this point. But for those people that are incarcerated that are poor, the DOJ said to keep you there for the main reason of you being poor is a violation. And that's always been the law, but see, for the last 20 years, they've been getting around that. That the DOJ itself admits to this. So this is evidence now, folks, not just this is a case of evidence. This is going to be spread out. It can be extended. I think it was only applicable to a small group of things, but when you apply it to the concept of as against what they're supposed to do for bail, remember, they're not even talking about released on your own recognizance. And then what I would tell you before, challenge the jurisdiction so they can't even impose that. You got a lot of steps here that's not talked about. But they're already agreeing you're subject to jurisdiction, that even so, if you're poor, you don't have enough assets for them to collect up. See, all commerce. Value is now commerce. The value of monetary value is commerce. So that's the kind of crime you're in. That you can't be held, that it's unconstitutional. That application is also not stating but recognizing what the actual reason for bail is, which is that they retain money from you sufficient that you would want to not lose that money in lieu of not showing up to court. It's all about getting you to come to court. So if your word is your bond, you don't need a bail bond. If your word is your bond, you're presumed to be innocent. Not only innocent, you're also presumed to be of your word, which said you'll show up. So you've made your contract. That's the thing that's also missing. But the last Thursday, the U.S. Department of Justice, USDA, made a shocking statement that it will no longer use private prison systems to incarcerate federal prisoners, saying that they are less safe and less effective than government-run facilities. Was another part of this story. That these public-private, sustainable partnerships are not valid. They're not safe. They're less effective. They're costly. They don't do justice. This was a welcome news for those that realized that not-for-profit prisons contribute to the problems of mass incarceration, but the feds still need to address the glaring issue of jailing people for victimless crimes and such drug issues as an opinion that may be. The point is that in these, it's not about the public-private partnership jails. It's that they are utilizing the incarceration and the ignorance of the real reason for why you get to be released for a supposed or a presumed charge. That the decisions of the bar members have been, and the judge since the decision, have been to incarcerate all these people in order to fulfill certain contractual obligations or other needs, other agendas that we don't know about, and keeping the private jails full. You see, when the people have the purse, you can't abuse it so well. When your jail's full, it's full, and that's it, all right? I mean, you got to go get more money to get more jails. If the people don't want to pay for it, then they have to do their reasonability rotation type thing. In fact, when Turkey arrested a whole bunch of thousands and thousands of people, everybody in jail got kicked out because they only had so much jail space, even in that dictatorship. So all the ones that were in jail got kicked out in favor of the more heinous criminal, presumed innocent as they say they might be, the more heinous criminal of a Gulen supporter. Figure that one out. But this all works that way. That when you privatize this kind of thing, you step outside of your Republican form representative or your representation by your taxation limitation, and organized crime prevails. And so the DOJ is finding that out because I think that report that came out, the guy that said my 4 months in a private prison, he was actually an author. I can't remember now the paper that or the organization he worked for that he reported on. A private investigator went in and became a prison guard and explained this whole thing. Information you can't get that he was able to expose. And I find it very interesting. Since then, a lot of this stuff starts to fall out. Federal government can't use these private-public partnerships, and they're keeping them full by going after people who have no money. And the judges allow, this is how criminal it is, the judges allow not the standard for getting you to show up, but the standard that may allow them to keep you for a more money demand. And so this builds on you. This is a plunder. This is another plunder system. This is what I had trouble with in the beginning, is that, wait a minute, now the rules are saying this, they're doing this. And I was still in the mind that there was justice in America, and there was, a check and a balance everywhere. And so that's a hard thing to have to break down in yourself. Your mind wants to say, well, you believe that everything was right. What you start to research is that everything is there to be right, but none of it, almost none of it is. None of it. I would have to say none of it. The effects on the prison industrial complex were immediate as stock values crashed for the Corrections Corporation of America and the CEO group. Now, another DOJ ruling has the for-profit prison system reeling. They should have never resorted to this. It's funny how a truth coming out in law has a way to cause the rats to flee the ship. It causes a cleaning of the system, doesn't it? The graft, the advantage, the opportunity falls away when we start looking more and more constrained to what exists that was sitting there to protect everybody against this type of a thing. Where it used to be kings would just declare you to be like Erdogan, you're a Gulen supporter, I'm sticking you in jail. And we'll do our things to you to extract that confession, knowing full well that confessions is known not to stand up at all. They don't care. Remember, these people, this mind, this psychopathy, this caucustocracy of the world doesn't care about killing people. That's quite fine. Everyone agrees with that. Bail practices that incarcerate indigent individuals before trial solely because of their inability to pay for the release violate the 14th Amendment, the agency said in its amicus brief. Not accounting for indigence results in, quote, the unnecessary incarceration of numerous individuals who are presumed innocent. Fast forward back, what about the Bundys? What about the people of Harney County? They're presumed innocent? And upon what declaration is the declaration you tell them what assets you have? So, if you understand how this works, if you have nothing in the state when it comes to fill out their state commerce papership for the purposes of release, you can say you got no assets to keep your assetting in the jail. So you give that over to them. If you got nothing registered in the state, you don't have anything to claim. Okay, I've been telling you this a long time, but didn't say it so directly. And so you have no commerce benefit, do you? This is how this works. But the DOJ came back in their amicus and said this is a violation of the 14th Amendment and people are presumed innocent. Here's evidence that the DOJ knows the harm they're doing to all of this, to these people. And I'm hesitant to say a whole lot more. I mean, there's lots to talk about. This is where someone didn't know how to avoid the jurisdiction by a pre-plea remedy and avoidance. This only happens after you have pled or agreed to plea and agreed to return. And you haven't challenged that there was no right for them to demand your appearance or return or any of that. That's more the world I sit in and focus on. So that, I mean, again, if you can find the failure in the first step, why do you take the rest of the journey? It's not a sight. You're in the valley of the shadow of death. Why do you want to go see the sights? And just to scare yourself? It's a fearsome place, so don't challenge the fear. But you fear not nonetheless. Allows you to now engage a whole lot more productively. So there's a shifting kind of going on here. I wasn't able, it's coming too fast for me to really put in context overall. I look at it more that there's their admissions and confessions by the people that are causing the plunder of their limit, and you can pick this up and start to use this a lot of places, whether it's for you or to help somebody. Now, what they'll do is they'll start splitting hairs on you. You got to learn that that's a limitation thing. You just got to learn about that. I can't discuss it here. It's all a case-by-case anticipation. You're making that part up. But if you make it up on the point and on a valid point and on their habitual response, you'll do pretty good for yourself, my experience. United States Justice Department announced their plans. This is after they've now agreed that this is, all this time these people have been violated under the 14th Amendment, even under the presumption of innocence has been violated. Right after that decision, the United States Department of Justice, the Justice Department announced plans on Thursday to phase out its use of privately owned prisons, calling them less safe and less effective than government-run facilities, is the same statement they made to the court in its amicus. Where was this fact before, folks? There's some witness out in the world calling attention to this, or this wouldn't happen. That's you not being crickets. That's you going beyond the grasshopper as well. You become a master in your own life. You become your own authority. You start from there. You understand that. You understand the limits of that because you're not the only one in the world. But you understand how powerful that is as well. You see both sides of that. It's a double-edged sword. You wield it with responsibility and care. That's the authority we start from. That's the authority the government's supposed to be protecting. That's the authority they wield. And when you allow them to go beyond, or you witness as they're going beyond, they got to be careful because as an occupier, they can't really tick off the natives. They're going to get theirs one day, and if the sooner that they don't keep that, or as soon as they don't keep that covered up, the people that they control will rise up against them and toss them out. One way or the other, they're gone from this reality. Now, I won't go on. They talked about the private prison industry. This has just been anyway, I don't even want to go down that path. That's just a plunder, another way to plunder. It's the bottom line. Clint Richardson's Corporation Nation comes to mind. Obviously, this decision was real difficult for him because it did in fact affect an industry, and the stocks plummeted. That's not a good thing for the government bottom line, but what are they up against? They're up against a bunch of people finding out that the whole of the government criminal system is criminal. Just like it says, the criminal justice system. As we adjust it, criminal just us system, just cause, no just cause. They're being found out. So beyond the crickets, beyond the grasshoppers, we've got some people out there making some witness and sticking with it. And so that, to me, that was encouraging. On the other side of this DOJ response, the Obama administration now, if we think that's going in the right direction, be careful. Don't keep running over the cliff on our celebration here and forget where we are. Obama administration's $1 billion giveaway to the private prison industry was a following story all at the same time. For the first time in modern history, the government decides to detain all Central American women and children seeking asylum in the United States instead of allowing them to live freely until their days in court. The policy change is intended to send a message to anyone else seeking refuge from the plague of gang violence below our southern borders. Don't believe everything you read in the Statue of Liberty. Well, we go on and on. There's a lot of opinion going on here. The point is, the government's willing to put money into private prisons if it serves their other purpose. See, right now, there's not a big backlog. There's not a big opinion against women and children being put in jail if they can put a taint of gang connection to women and children. You'll agree to have them put away, and the private industry will survive. See, those people are as innocent as well, underneath the presumption of innocence. It goes all the way. Now, there's been some people that would say, well, they're not citizens, they don't deserve it. Well, who doesn't deserve this inherent right of innocence? I don't understand. So, not to get into the philosophical maybe sides of this, the government will spend the money, billions, to keep some people in a private prison. There is a utility. I guess that's what I'm pointing out to you. Whatever the bottom line and the liability and risk to the occupier is where they make their decisions. I want you to keep that focus. It allows me to see, well, it keeps me a whole lot more grounded on where things are at. It allows me to see also how this beast functions. What is its guidelines? I use all that I see in my engagements. You find where it will go, and you find where it won't go, and you figure out how that can be used against them in a court of law, so-called. It's their self-incrimination. Now, again, I talk in government, but these are people in government. You focus in on them. Somebody's going to put a signature down. You'll notice a lot of the court case opinions don't have signatures. That should be troubling to you. Doesn't mean you can't get them, but I mean it's more troubling that the people allow that to continue, and they've given themselves over. See, they report on themselves, and that's okay. We'll allow this little squiggly here to be like a signature. But we need signatures if this is a evidentiary-based society that those evidences allow us to be peaceful. Why is that? Because the evidences provide objective basis of a record that we can all look at and hopefully interpret it the same way. Why one language is really important. So that's the objective basis that was supposed to be determined by a neutral party. Then you find out that the occupier is sitting in that seat of decision, and they're not so neutral. They're involved, let's go back, they're involved with advancing the policies of an entity that's fabricated in the world for a political destruction measure that was done long before a lot of us, and then right during some of you, that was a plunder tool. They're willing to kill you all. These are the people making these decisions. They're willing to kill you all. They're willing to watch people destroyed in lots of ways. That's the status quo now. It's not the other way around where everyone's afraid to be found out for doing that. No, the criminal gets along by it because, we have the excuse that, the criminal system is the best in the world we have, but it takes time. I've told you, delay is injustice, folks. As soon as they give you an official affront to a property right remedy or interest that you have that they don't have a right to do, that's a felony. Why does that take so long to arrest? They'll certainly arrest you if you go rob the bank. Another story showing the delineations here. Parents who can't pay the bills for kids' incarceration can still go bankrupt, a court rules. I don't even know why that became a question, folks, but there's some just dirty, evil people in government that need to have their feathers clipped. When Maria Rivera got a bill from Orange County for her young son's year in juvenile detention, she sold her house to pay for it. Think about this dynamic. The legal system got involved with her offspring, called him a name, defamed him, and called him a juvenile, and then charged him and charged her to the point she had to sell her house. In what world is that peace and settlement, folks? She sold her house to pay for this Bar Association imposed fine, fee, taxation, civil right, but ended up short. Who's controlling the value here as well, folks? And the county got a court order through the judge, the bar member, the county through their attorney, the bar member, got a court order against her who probably had no protection whatsoever for another $10,000 to pay for the remainder and various fees and penalties. When Rivera declared bankruptcy, the court refused to let up, arguing that the law that prevents parents from escaping their child support duties in bankruptcy applied to parents who'd been dinged for their kids' jail time. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled saying that this was BS, is the writing here, the saying it was BS and letting Rivera get on with her life. See, bankruptcy is to relieve you of this commercial oppression, and you start your life anew. That's what it is. The bankruptcies are paid by the people to allow them to continue to function in the commercial sector when things go wrong. This is what people don't understand. If Trump ever went on bankruptcy, however he's done it through his corporations, he has taken money from the public to pay for the system that allows him to be free of his bad decisions. It goes for anybody. And in a way, it's a kind of a cool thing. This country was set up also in commerce, and there's rules set up so that you don't get beat down so much in commerce that you're destroyed. That's what bankruptcy is supposed to protect. And bankruptcy is supposed to be available to free you of those obligations. The court wrote that the case was troubling because it, quote, compromises the goals of juvenile correction and the best interests of the child, and ironically impair the ability of his mother to provide him with future support. Listen to the logic there. You can use this. What I found interesting is first she's a parent underneath the charge, now she's a mother. Consider that when you're looking at these decisions. See, in law, she's a legal custodian of a juvenile, which is a state ward. How'd that all happen? That's what you have to undo. They're not supposed to then beat you down, impose more fines, and then keep you from being relieved of that. They're telling you also what I've told you before. You can't impose something and not give a remedy for the imposition. The court condemned the reliance of the probation department on unremittingly pursuing legal actions against disadvantaged individuals. Wow. Why don't you learn how to make yourself a disadvantaged individual? To me, that was a big statement right there. Everyone thinks a disadvantaged individual is someone who just, I'm just poor and uneducated. No, it's someone who knows how to make the law work. It's one who knows how to make the legal entities and what they hold in the state show. But this more importantly says that the government, through a department of its corporation right here, who pursues legal action against a disadvantage is not proper. I want you to adapt that to the whole court system, folks. It's not hard. Sending poor, racialized people inescapable bills for their kids' jail time is profoundly unjust and cruel, the first step on the path that the Chinese pursued, whose terminus would be the practice of sending families bills for the bullets who used to execute their loved ones. This is how this starts to devolve when you don't apply the principles. When you allow these plunderers in chief and in the corporations and the counties and in the cities to get their way underneath the continuing advice of a bar association that attempts to get away with this. Somewhere this judge looked at this and said, this is just not working for me. That one had a little bit of conscience, I'm glad to hear. This is the system. Not just talking about the racialized, disabled. This is everyone has a disability in their professional, vocational, privatized, private-public partnership in the system as looking like the illusion of an agency of the government. We sued that. We exposed the illusion for what it was. It was a cover for crimes. Oregon County's public budget shows the probation department relies on self-generated revenue for more than 40% of its financing, seeking to obtain that revenue by unremittingly pursuing legal action against disadvantaged individuals. The counterproductive practice at issue here can have damaging effects on the community. Not only does such a policy unfairly conscript the poorest members of society to bear the cost of public institutions operating as a regressive tax, in quotes, as a regressive tax. You didn't think that's what it was, did you? You think you're just paying for doing wrong, or the juvenile being kind of out and unruly and the father of the state. Parents patriae stepping in to be the father in the family. You think it's just, I'm going to give you a little bit of whippings. Here's the fine. That's the commercial whippings. No, this is a tax on your life, what they do to you. And it's regressive where it doesn't benefit either party at the advantage of the state itself. You can put that rule in everything the government does anymore to show you how far away from justice we really are, the way the law should work. Being caught here for the first time, and I'm saying take this story, look at it, put it the same sets of facts on what the government does in other places and apply it. But it takes advantage of people when they're most vulnerable, essentially imposing a tax upon distress. Your civil rights is the right to pay exactions of every kind. They're not joking here, folks. The problem is when it starts to interfere and expose the system to be the plunderer, that's the occupier having to cover his tail. Apparently there's been a lot of grumblings about this, and it's been coming. I've been watching it. I'm glad to see it reach the light of day. This is what the government does, and if you put yourself into commercial status and then don't negate that or don't show how that commercial benefit never came to you to pay them, they can't come after you, this way at least. Again, evidence of a standard that does sit there. Remember, they talked to her as far as the description by the author. She had a juvenile and a parent. This is a ward of the state that's in being difficult, being non-compliant. The custodian of the ward, the parent, could not keep up with it. The state was going to take care of through its probation department. But the court said you can't now tax that custodian so much that they can't keep up. In this case, the court actually said that the mother couldn't keep up. Why they did a jurisdictional shift there is interesting, not amazing, but interesting for me to see. And maybe, I haven't again had time to look at the analysis, maybe another subtlety that allows the lifting of the problem. See, when you're now down so far, I don't know about racial or anything, when you're down so far that you're not taking benefit, you're not in the commerce benefit anymore. They can take judicial notice of the failure of commercial nexus. And now she might become the mother here, not the parent. It's a different analysis that I'm doing here than you should actually. I do it to qualify other things in my interpretation. But I look at these subtleties, these changes, because I've found they become important in being able to keep things straight, in tracking what jurisdiction a judge, so-called, wearing many different jurisdictional hats, might be in, depends on what his vocabulary is at the time. And when you understand that and you can track that, I can just tell you, it puts a lot of interest and look on their faces. They understand you're paying attention. They understand you know what they're talking about. Even though the lawyer next to you may not know what they're talking about. And this is how they start to do it. If you keep track of this, what I was telling you before, your dictionary words may be jurisdictions. Keep track of those distinctions in your mind. It helps immensely. So the government's getting a little bit beat up here on all what it's been doing to beat down people. I'm suggesting all y'all are beat down. So it doesn't matter your financial capacity. You've kind of admitted into this fiat system by your admission and confession that you have all that stuff. By not situating yourself more properly in the legal system and taking advantage of the legal entities that hold nothing, and that you hold nothing, is part of the problem. So you got to, again, the paper, the evidence of what's before you, before the court of the seated decision. If you're trapped in it anyway, you might as well situate yourself in the least offensive matter, or the least opportunistic place, the place where they can't take much opportunity from you. So you can't be driven into poverty. You can't have we're now seeing that the prison debtor system is really no good, even though who should have told? Why do we even have to hear that? But that they are implementing that is the point. If you hadn't thought that they were, they are. They've just admitted that they are. You're walking into a plunder system that cannot check itself immediately. There's a delay. They cause injustice. Is another evidence that the system is unjust completely. It has no mechanism to protect you. Because they come up with a better answer is not justice here. The woman had to go through the pain. I don't know if anybody's been through bankruptcy. I never have, but I've helped people who have. That's just another weapon against you if you don't understand it. And yet, there's limitations in there. I was able to help someone, and the thief and the judge of the bankruptcy court came in to steal someone's property, and they wanted me to look at it. I looked at it and go, that judge just stole a trust. He's a trustee to that trust. He can't do that. No one identified that the so-called the inheritance was a trust that could not be invaded. And the judge had just done that, and I explained that to them. I said, so you have to tell them that's what happened. I don't think it was but 2 weeks that the trust was returned. They couldn't take it in bankruptcy. The way the guy had made it, he was very intelligent. I learned a lot looking at what they did. The gentleman who had made that legal tool made it so the state couldn't plunder it. And this is the first insights I'm getting, that there's tools when you have the knowledge you can do that can protect you even against these plunderers. But you have to tell them. You can't just let it go silent. They're looking at every opportunity to be an opportunist. Moving on, huge victory. Federal court bans government from prosecuting medical marijuana users and growers. This is a pretty big story. I don't get too much into that. I haven't had, again, time to go read the details, but last week the tyrannical DEA doubled down on their asinine and immoral decisions to classify marijuana as having no medical value, promising to continue to kidnap, cage, and kill people for possessing it. However, in a major victory and a well-deserved slap to the face of the DEA, a federal court of appeals has ruled that prosecuting medical marijuana users and growers is now banned. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals 3-judge panel has ruled that the Department of Justice cannot spend money, budget money, cannot appropriate funds to prosecute people who grow and sell or use medical marijuana if they comply with state law. To do so would interfere with the state's determinations. Now we're seeing the power of the sovereignty of the states. I won't go on more. You need to read this story, but this is in fact what's coming down if you have the right and better argument, not to give credibility to these inferior and incompetent courts. But there they are. We'll take them as we can get them. If you know this statement, you can go after. What have I told you about the misappropriation of public funds on any employee of the government? They have to spend the money where the money was allocated and appropriated. Outside of that, they've misappropriated the funds. That's what this case also states, as well as some other things. Again, what I've told you in the past comes as a thing to be put before someone who decides they want to come and steal from you. That they weren't paid by the government, didn't appropriate money to do that. It's another felony. And I was remiss last week in adding this thing, excuse me, to the list of challenges against that DEA decision. It was in my mind and I just slipped to say it. It came up the following week. The fact that where the government, the DEA, says there's no medical use, and a lot of you in the chat rooms knew, being the 420 experts that y'all are, that we knew, and I reported on this, I just forgot it, that the United States government holds a patent. And so the story that came out right after the broadcast was why cannabis users are writing this number on their hands and posting it online, was that the United States government holds where the DEA says there's no medical use, the United States government holds a patent on a number of uses. In the treatment of prophylaxis and wide variety of oxidative associated disease, such as ischemic, age-related inflammatory and autoimmune diseases, was covered in the patent. It's one of the things I was remiss to mention, that you would throw into the DEA statement that some of you should have sent off in challenging this, what he calls the asinine decision. This just has to be outed, and as long as you don't, all of y'all that work, think so highly of this situation and feel so oppressed, are oppressed because of your crookedness. Even those that maybe think that they're not. There's a way to go after these people. And once they have a bunch of us doing this way, they're going to start having to think twice. Once it's on them to be liable, they might think twice. I think they do. They used to. When they felt that they were going to be held accountable, you saw how well government government functioned a lot more efficiently. It's never been perfect, but we didn't hear the outlandish things like Haiti killing people, and everybody's okay with that. I mean, everybody that is a supposed authority. What kind of world are you living in, folks? They really have to answer that. Well, thank you for tuning in today. We're going to get a little bit early here, moving on, but thank you to Grimner for all you do at reallibertymedia.com and allowing the space for the blogcaster and the archives, and Bo Diddy and you on the freedomnetwork.com social network. Sign up, folks. And again, Grammy Mary, thank you very much for the Spreaker donations, where you do and all the work you do. And Jules, UCY.TV, appreciate that you offer the broadcast simulcast live, and then on repeatedly on your network, UCY.tv, and a live broadcast on their network every week. I'm every week. I think I've lost one. We had a power outage. I think I've lost one. So I'm here pretty dependable for them, even though it's a 2-hour nonstop night production. So I'll be here next week.